Welcome to the WriterDojo with your host, Steve Diamond.
We're going to need a bigger boat.
And Larry Correia.
Death. And I don't mean it metaphorically or rhetorically or poetically or theoretically or any other fancy way. I am death. Straight up.
Today's episode, Monsters, Round 2.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the WriterDojo. We're glad to have you back with us. So, on our last episode, we had to cut it a little short. It was our first Monsters episode. And we were all excited to talk about it. We get in here, we're talking, we're getting into it, and we realized that it was starting to snow really bad. And so Larry had to bail. And so our enthusiasm got cut short. So what we decided to do, and we brought this up towards the end of the episode, we decided we were going to turn our mutual love of monsters into 2 or 3 episodes longer than what we were going to. Kind of like we did with the writing action ones at the start of the previous season. So, producer Jack, he went online, he went on Facebook, and he, in our Facebook group, which if you didn't know, we have a WriterDojo Facebook group. It's awesome. It's shockingly helpful. We don't put up with anyone's BS, as we've discussed over the past few weeks.
We are not your mom or dad if you have a conflict with some other writer.
Allegedly.
Okay, I am somebody's mom. I'm like 4 people's mom or dad, but
I was going to say, I don't think you're anyone's mom.
I'm 4 people's dad, but I'm no one in this group's. Well, actually, my daughter's in there. Okay, well, you get what I mean.
So producer Jack, within the Facebook group, which you should join if you haven't, and we know there's a lot of you out there that dislike Facebook and blah, blah, blah. We don't care. Go in there, have fun, talk with people. We actually give really good writing advice within there. We have a staggering number of actually really good professionals in there.
A lot of really talented writers, a lot of really intelligent people, and a lot of debate. People debate stuff. People ask a lot of good questions, get good answers.
Yeah, and you'll get a wide variety, a very diverse, to use that word in what it really means.
The actual term, the actual
term.
Definition, not appropriately political.
Right. Like an actual diverse set of answers from different expertises, viewpoints, stuff like that. Yeah. It's awesome.
So we got a bunch of monster questions.
Some monster questions. Jack asked the question, and we got some pretty good questions in here. Some pretty good questionary responses to his questions.
Yeah, because last episode we talked a little bit about like monsters and why we like monsters, and we actually had to kind of rush because I didn't want to die on the roads, and it was bad here, guys. We have like so much snow, I have no place left to put it.
I'm so tired of snow. I'm so tired of it.
Live where I live.
Today's like the first day of blue skies forever, and I'm like, I don't even know what to do anymore.
We're in here recording.
I know. All right. So monsters. Just a really brief recap. We love them. They're amazing. There's all sorts of different uses for them. You don't have to be writing horror or urban fantasy or whatever, or one specific genre to include monsters. They can be in anything you want them to be in.
Well, yeah, and we also, like, when we say monsters, I mean, there's no reason this can't be alien races on science fiction or anything else, really. I mean, I guess we could even go paranormal romance if you want, if the conversation goes that direction. But basically, it's just a great storytelling tool to kind of mix stuff up. And I know last time we talked about some of our favorites and some of the ones we think have done right, done wrong, how to do them. We're going to try to give you guys some nuts and bolts today. Monsters have paid for my house, so I am a pretty big fan. Like Monster Hunter International, I write them all.
Monsters have paid for my occasional brisket.
Yeah. All right, so let's go. Let's see what these guys got for us.
All right.
Test our limits.
So, one of the questions, well, there's 2 questions, and one of them is, why don't we see monsters from other cultures used more?
Well, that's an interesting one. Okay, here's the thing. That's actually a really good one, but I'm going to have to expand that a little bit because I think some of us do use them. And I think if you're populating your book and you're populating your universe with different monsters, go for it. If there's something from another culture that you want to use in your books, go for it. Like for me, Monster Hunter International, I always have some weird thing. I've hit all the big main Western ones that we've talked about last episode: vampires, zombies, werewolves, so on and so forth.
The normals, yeah.
The normal ones. But I've gotten into some weird stuff. I've borrowed stuff from Filipino mythology, Greek mythology, African mythology. I mean, because I'm now 12 books into this series with the spinoffs and whatnot. Yeah, I've gone like out all over the world. I think part of the problem too, for like a lot of people writing fantasy, they tend to limit themselves when they're creating a creature to, was it in the D&D monster manual?
That's fair.
But I don't think people should limit themselves.
No.
If you're stealing from mythology and you're stealing from folklore, go nuts.
I saw in the Facebook group the other day, someone was talking about, it had something, I don't remember the exact quote of it, but they were talking about how if they were writing stuff like a story that was based upon a different culture, like what should they do, how should they do it, blah, blah, blah. Now, specifically, I think we tend to see most fantasy kind of has that European-ish setting.
Yeah,
right?
It tends to have a European vibe.
Right. And so a lot of the creatures or monsters that you see tend to be fairly reflective of that. Whereas if we look at other cultures, if you're basing your story, whether we're talking fantasy, urban fantasy, whatever, on a different culture, then it seems to me that you really should be using the craziness and the creatures from that era, from that area. So, like Son of the Black Sword, right? Very Indian.
Yeah.
And so, the demons that are coming from the oceans and stuff.
Actually kind of went little xenomorphy.
Exactly. We're going that way, or even
so kind of a wild divergence from
it's not European,
so to speak,
quote unquote. If I was setting a story in Mexico, straight up Mexico, I would pull mainly from like Aztec-y sort of things, or creatures like that. And I know you did that in Bloodlines.
Yeah, so Steve actually lived in Mexico for a while, so I figure I'm working on the next Monster Hunter. I do actually get into like Mayan and Aztec pantheon. I'll probably be bouncing some stuff off you to make sure that I'm getting getting it right. Not that you're an expert on this, but at least you speak the language, so you can read the original source documents and make sure I didn't screw it up. But yeah, no, I've borrowed heavily from South American stuff in some books. Also, too, is like, where does the book take place?
I think that's it.
Like logistically, what makes sense? I've had scenes from Monster Hunter in probably a dozen different countries now, and I have borrowed different creatures from different myth for each one.
Okay, so I'm going to riff off of that really quick, because the next question was, how can a writer find a fresh perspective on the presentation of a monster in their story? So we're talking about some of these common monsters, right? Or, well, to us, maybe they're a little common. To other people, maybe they're not quite as common. But how are we taking some of those, how do we take some of these common tropes, so to speak, and make them our own?
That's an interesting question, because I have two diametrically opposed ways of doing this. So first off, there's the monsters that I play straight. Like I leave them to the standard interpretation, like standard cultural interpretation. Like when I started doing Monster Hunter, I did vampires as vampires, like straight up evil, bloodthirsty, killer, predators of the night, powerful creatures, right? I went old school Dracula level power monsters, right? There's other creatures I decided to take a different tack and kind of like twist them to give it a unique perspective. Not just monsters, but I did elves and orcs, gnomes, minotaurs. These are all things that are known, but I decided to give them a unique perspective. And how did I make it my own? I just did something other people hadn't done. So that's why I have trailer park elves. I have heavy metal orcs. I have ghetto gnomes. I have Texas bullmen or minotaurs. And basically, so it's just it's my own thing. And so for me, half the fun with a monster, when a monster shows up in one of my books, in a Monster Hunter novel, Is the monster going to play it straight and be the kind of thing you expect it to be? But yeah, usually. But about one monstrous race per book that I introduced turns out to be something odd.
Yeah.
But some are really obvious. So like when I had trolls, when I finally introduced trolls, they're internet trolls. Like quite literally, that's what they do for fun. They get on the internet and they're just awful. They're just awful, awful creatures. And they leet speak, right? That's how they communicate. And I did that. It was hilarious, but I can't do that with every monster because then it becomes trite. If every monster is twisted off off of the original compass, then what's the point, right? You know what I'm saying? Because
then they're not the monsters anymore.
They're not special anymore.
Exactly.
But like I did Mr. Trashbag as a Shoggoth, what I did there is I just one individual monster. So most Shoggoths, I went straight up with the Lovecraftian giant blob of destruction, terrifying blob of destruction.
And he still is.
He still is.
Just not with one person.
Yeah, but there's one that actually loves a human being and is basically the most loyal companion you could ever ask for. He's just a giant, puppy.
Just a giant,
that
amorphous, tentacled, eyeballed mouth
can
puppy.
instantly kill you with his tentacles of death. But that was Mr. Trashbags, right? But I still kept Shoggoths as a terrifying entity. So I don't know. It's a fine line there, guys. I would say don't overdo it because if you're going to just completely throw everything out about the monster, then it's not even really that monster anymore. If you throw everything out, that's why I think Twilight offended a lot of horror movie purists. Like okay, young girls and lonely moms. And the romance crowd, they love Twilight. So a lot of copies, I'm not faulting that, but to all us horror movie people and monster book people, we see Twilight, and to us, it's an affront because that ain't a vampire, right? They threw out everything that makes a vampire a vampire.
No, I'm expecting either Dracula or 30 Days of Night.
Yeah, see now 30 Days of Night was an interesting one because they took the vampire thing and man, they made it savage.
They're feral.
Yeah,
and it was awesome.
Like oh my gosh, that was actually a pretty dang good movie.
Yeah, it's not bad.
And actually from pretty close to the comic book.
Yeah.
Yeah, like pretty dang close. So that's one that they took the existing monster traits and for that spin on that monster accentuated the viciousness and the savagery of it.
And it still made sense within the context, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, because the whole idea is they're going up to that one. I can never remember what it's called, but
Barrow, Alaska.
Yeah. And I was talking with Brennan about this the other day.
Hey, he's worked up there.
Yeah. But anyway, it's, if you think about it, if you were a whole bunch of vampires, I mean, that's totally the place I would go.
Well, the way
it makes sense.
The way it sets it up is it's a vampire party.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. It's just a vampire celebration of carnage, and that's what they're doing. And that's what the movie does, and it works. Like, holy crap, it works.
So one of the things that I do, you see this in my Jack Bishop series in Residue, and then in Parasite, which should be coming out here in the next few months, I think. I take traditional monsters, say your werewolves, your vampires, your zombies, whatever, and then I apply weird science to them. So in Residue, one of the main things is they're going after this leech. They call it the leech in the book. It's just a vampire. It's just a psychic vampire. That's all it is. But I science it up a little bit. Yeah. And I do the same thing. I refer to these creatures within it called the hounds. They're just werewolves. And I specifically say they were created by taking werewolf DNA and threading it into humans, and adding some weird science to it. So I kind of get the best of both worlds. I get to say and play with traditional monsters, but then I get to change them because mankind definitely would.
Oh, yeah.
If we could.
Pfizer would.
Pfizer, absolutely.
Pfizer's probably doing it right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no joke.
I'm waiting for that Project Veritas video.
Jeez. So it's interesting, right?
We're not really making werewolves. I was just trying to impress my date.
Yeah.
We could do a hilarious story of Project Veritas videos going horribly wrong.
That'd be awesome.
Get that camera out of my face.
So it's, when you have these when you have these very traditional monsters, there is a certain, a fairly large portion, I think, of the readership or the viewership that they want at least a part of that creature to be familiar.
Yeah.
They need something to anchor it down.
Yeah, you can't diverge too far because then you kind of lose the script.
Yeah, exactly. At a certain point, it's not that monster anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing. So to answer these questions, I think the freshness or the fresh perspective of it has to do with you. It has to do with the story that you're telling, the setting in which you're telling it, and the characters involved. Like for Werewolf Cop, he's just a werewolf, right? He's a werewolf.
Yeah.
But the fresh perspective isn't necessarily the monster aspect. It's what does the human part of him do? Well, he's a detective. And then, and the reason this is on my mind, I just edited that story for you and Casey the other night.
I got it. I haven't read it yet. I'm very excited.
It's very good.
That's in my pile I just received. I got yours and Hinckley's.
Towards the end, I go through the whole, the transformation process, and I wrote it to be as violent as possible. And Casey's comment was, and there's the horror author.
Casey said it was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was on the note.
And it has a really, really good ending. But anyway,
Cool.
The whole point is you don't necessarily have to be crazy and unique with all aspects of it. Think about what the monster means, what it is. You can twist one small aspect of it, and oftentimes that's enough, or give it a unique spin. So again, a werewolf is a werewolf. But if your werewolf is also a detective, that's the unique spin.
Yeah, some of mine, I didn't change anything physically, any physical trait about the creature. I just changed the culture it lived in. Mm-hmm. And that made it unique.
Exactly. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to answer some more questions. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Okay. Next question, Larry. How do you make the human monster scarier than the traditional ones? Now, this is a cool question because this comes back to what I always talk about, where the point of a lot of monster movies and such is that they try to point out how much worse humans are than the actual monster.
Yeah, that's done a lot.
Frankenstein and even I Am Legend kind of goes down that route, or part of Alien even touches on
the corporations. Most zombie apocalypse movies tend to fall in that trap.
They always fall in this line.
And here's the thing: it could be good, it could be bad. Mm-hmm. When I say bad, it could be the kind of thing like Walking Dead, which I don't watch, but I've just heard people
complain.
Missing
anything.
Yeah, where everybody is just a horrible person and no one, people never get their crap together because they're all just busy being dummies and murderous dorks, and that's not really human nature. Now, if you do want to do the human is more villainous than the monster, that's easy. All you got to do is you got to get the monster and the human in the same story and have the monster be terrifying in one way, but then have the human be terrifying in a different way. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really all it comes down to. And that sounds trite, but like when I did Stricken and Monster Hunter, I made this. People hate this guy. They hate him because he is the ultimate chest master manipulator, 3 steps ahead of everyone else, screwing with people, dirtbag.
I mean, he manipulates the monsters.
Yeah, this guy manipulates fairy queens. Mm-hmm. and this guy is just he's just that. But so it is, and so how do I make him scarier? I mean, that dude's terrifying. Like, he's literally terrifying because a lot of times it's just like he's so freaking manipulative and you don't know what's coming from him and you don't know why he's doing what he's doing, but there always seems to be a logic to it.
I think it comes down to, for me anyway, it comes down to preying on different fears. So monsters prey upon very specific types of fears. Fear of let's talk about Alien, right? Fear of being taken over. Fear of what's in the dark, fear of the unknown, all of those things, and then loss of control, the body horror of it, mm-hmm. Loss of self. The human within there, they're not scary because of those things. They're scary because, the Weyland-Yutani, right? Why are they scary? Well,
giant unfeeling mega corporation that uses people, feeds them to monsters, and then harvests the tissue.
Yeah. Like they're completely different types of fear. And I think if you have a human and a monster within the same story, both preying on the same type of fear, you're going to have problems, right? Because they kind of blend together. And then at that point, it's like, well, then why do you have both?
It'd be like a werewolf movie with a serial killer in it. They're both kind of doing the same thing, just slightly different.
Right.
You know what's an interesting one to think on that? I just thought of this, but the old movie Pitch Black.
Oh yeah, the Riddick
with
movies?
Riddick, the first Riddick movie, where Riddick is the prisoner, and actually is scarier than the monsters. And then he turns into the anti-hero during the movie. But that first Riddick movie was actually pretty legit.
Yeah,
because you had these terrifying monsters, the whole echolocation creatures. Mm-hmm. But then you had this one crazy dude with knives. Was scarier than the monsters.
And the thing about him too is he has the raw instincts of the creatures, but he also thinks.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times in these situations, the way that the human becomes scarier is because it isn't just acting by instinct like a lot of monsters do, or that we portray them as, subject to their urges and baser instincts. Mm-hmm. It's, they know what the right decisions are.
Yeah.
They choose to be horrible.
Well, Dr. Frankenstein is the original, right?
Correct.
Okay, but he's playing God, creates horrible abominations, and the monster is not really the monster. Mm-hmm. The old joke of Frankenstein's not the monster, he's Frankenstein's monster, but actually Frankenstein is the monster. Yeah. And so there's that, and then there's other ones like the mad scientist creates the horrible creature, and who's really the horrible, and that's the whole Frankenstein trope over and over again. There's a million different ways to do that. I think it just can be story dependent.
I think so.
And as long as you have a strong enough character with understandable motivations, and they don't have to be completely understandable, but you have to allude to understandable motivations. You can't have somebody who's just like super, super evil for no discernible reason, because then it's like, why is this doesn't make any sense? So the monster's eating the townsfolk, and this one guy's feeding feeding townsfolk to the monster. Why? There's got to be a reason. Now, if you can come to a compelling reason, that's the pact he made with the old ones, then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, okay.
Yeah, or there's some sort of sympathy for the devil complex within there, or something.
Or you can even, I've seen them where they've done evil but sympathetic. The reason he's feeding the townsfolk to the monster is he's actually trying to find a cure for his daughter, who was the first monster. Whatever. Yeah. You can spin this 100 different ways. Mm-hmm. So that's actually a good question. That's an interesting writing challenge.
All right. So one of the questions talks about the difference of treating monsters and writing monster encounters when in two scenarios where the monster isn't they're not known or accepted versus they're a standard part of life. So think about your standard monster movie versus something like, say, Charlene Harris's
True Blood.
Where
vampires, everyone knows vampires exist.
Yeah, and there's like product marketing to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the question is, how do you what is the difference in writing monster encounters in those situations?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think it's just going to be a question of mystery and familiarity. Because even if the monsters are real and they're real, how familiar are you? Do you see them on TV, or do you have them living next door?
So think about it this way too, and this will be a kind of a. I was gonna use one specific analogy, but I'm gonna switch. I'll make this more fun. Accountants. Okay, accountants are often considered monsters in this world.
So misunderstood.
So misunderstood. Many of us are so sexy.
It's paranormal romance.
But accountants exist, right? But how many of you actually know the ins and the outs of what accountants do and how they work? Okay. Now, transplant that to what you were saying with monsters. Yes, they exist in that scenario, say, but how much do you really know about them? Mm-hmm. I would think that in the public consciousness, there would be, propaganda for or against that would be warring within a person's encounter. Typical fears, xenophobia, all the normal stuff that we already deal with on a day-to-day basis.
There's a lot of interesting movies that have done, like Fido, where they did the zombie apocalypse, post-apocalypse, where they got the zombies reined in, and now they're like using the zombies for like gardening and whatnot and household servants. There are some different weird ones like that. There's like the end of Shaun of the Dead.
Right.
You know what I mean? When they're playing video games together again. And like literally nothing's changed for the one character.
Yeah.
But honestly, there's a bunch of different ways you can tackle that. And I think it just kind of depends on your world building and like what the monsters are too. Are they monsters that can cohabitate with human beings successfully, or are they monsters that are still deadly and scary and going to eat people?
Yeah.
You know. So the question is, it's known. There's a wide thing there because like here's the thing: we have evil, scary human beings in the world right now. So the question is like, what kind of story? Well, it depends. If I'm writing a story about terrorism and I'm like, in Syria, it's a different story than I'm watching it on the news and it's a faraway distant thing. But then if it comes here and comes to your town and something blows up, then all of a sudden it's a different kind of story. You know?
Yeah. And the same thing with say serial killers, it's one thing to read accounts of, Gacy and Bundy and stuff like that and Dahmer, but it's a whole nother thing to talk with people who had firsthand experience.
Yeah.
Or had that, or have it be in their backyard.
Well, going back to the humans as monsters thing, we live in a world with violent crime is all around. I mean, I just wrote a book about the Second Amendment and gun rights.
Yeah. What's that book called, Larry?
In Defense of the Second Amendment, Steve.
On bookstores, on bookshelves and bookstores.
And also an audiobook, and doing rather well. Yeah. But, okay, back to But I just wrote this book. I had to get all these crime stats. There are human monsters amongst us everywhere now, but we have places in our country where how you deal with them is much more commonplace than others. So we have most of America is actually really super safe. And you'll be like, yeah, I know there's criminals. I know there's murderers, and I'm prepared for murderers, and I'm defending myself. Then you got people who live in a place that's murder central. Their concept of it's going to be much different because they're closer, more visceral. This is a daily kind of thing. It's like when there's places that you were in Mexico that like there is no American equivalent.
No.
There's just not you literally have Sicario gun trucks driving down the street. And it's just like, these are the guys.
There's no equivalent for pyramids of heads in America.
Yeah, like literally head pyramids, Yeah. And so it's one of those things. It's like, so I think honestly, there's no limit to the kind of story that could be told. And it's because we got real life analogies to that.
Well, and the cool thing about that is, again, we're not just, what I talked about at the top of the show, we're not just talking about one genre. I mean, you can take these encounters, whether overt or in secret, and, do you want to tell a horror story? Totally cool. What about a comedy? Absolutely. Science fiction? Definitely. Western, we talked about Western a couple episodes back. You can tackle all this the same way.
Yeah. I follow Shane Hensley on Facebook from Pinnacle from Savage Worlds, and he's currently touring the Northwest because he's doing a new expansion for Savage Worlds Deadlands for Wendigos.
Nice. I do love a good Wendigo story.
And when he posted that, I was like, dude, you realize, and he's traveling around, I was like, dude, you realize this is how like a lot of found footage horror movies start, right? There's a post like this.
Say, we saw Antlers. We know how this ends for you, buddy. Poor Shane.
I haven't seen Antlers yet.
Dude, it's awesome.
I heard it's good. You told me it was good. Yeah. That's why I heard it.
So, another question here for you, Larry. And I'm going to read this one, but I don't want to answer it specifically with the monster that's referenced here. It says, how would you write Godzilla without it being Godzilla? So the idea here is something that's so big, so, and I don't just mean in literal size, but metaphorically speaking, something that's so ingrained within the public consciousness. How do you write something like that without it being like, oh, this is Godzilla?
Which is ironic because I've written so dang many things now that immediately I thought of 3 different projects where I've written a kaiju monster.
I know.
Of various sizes.
I've written that too.
Yeah, ironically. Okay, so, and I know, you very specifically have. Yeah, that was your Hugo nomination even.
That was my woo.
Yeah.
For all the good that did.
Your flirt with fame there and fortune.
Dude, that, you know how much money I've made just because of that single Hugo nomination, Larry?
$7?
Nothing.
Oh, I was hoping it'd be at least enough to get like a Subway foot long. 6 inch.
Yeah, inflation's a bitch.
All right, so in Spellbound, at the end of Spellbound, I have a giant monster fight across Washington, D.C. And how did I do Godzilla without doing Godzilla? Okay, this was actually an extra-dimensional creature imprisoned by the husk of a man who can control extra-dimensional monsters. Only this extra-dimensional monster he summoned was the biggest, scariest one ever, and it took over. And now that fight was awesome because this thing grows out of the Potomac. It's insanely terrifying. It's gigantic.
It's a good thing you had that telekinetic there named Steve Diamond.
He was actually there. He was in the scene because he was on the battle at Roosevelt Island before we sucked Roosevelt Island through a portal into another dimension. Okay, there's a lot of stuff to unpack here if you haven't read the books. But what I did is I created basically a giant kaiju monster. It was this extra-dimensional demon creature who rampages across DC. And the reason I did this was because originally the finale of the book didn't have this. But I had this character, I had this type of monster, and I'd experimented with this a little bit, but hadn't introduced to a really, really big, scary one yet. That said, the original finale of the book wasn't punchy enough, and I needed something bigger. So I came back and I went super big on this. And part of that was accentuating the super big. Plus, the book takes place in 1934, which was the year that King Kong came out. So, that was the original American kaiju.
You're right.
It is, yeah. And when I realized that this is book 34, I was like, I have to have a giant kaiju monster scene because it's 1934 Godzilla. King Kong. So I actually have the monster climb up the Washington Monument while swatting down biplanes.
Yeah.
And so straight up I went King Kong. Only this thing was nuts. And now how did I actually write it? The immensity of it. And what I tried to accentuate for the characters dealing with this thing was just the mind-boggling immensity of it. I Google Earthed the area. Because I had never, at the time I wrote this, I hadn't yet been to Washington, D.C. in the mall. I had actually been there repeatedly since. I'm sure I was on camera the entire time because the facial recognition software, they're like, it's this guy. But
that'll get you kicked out of places now.
Which is ironic because I might be going back there for business.
Super weird.
But I can't talk about that yet. But that'll be really weird because I might be doing something weird. Okay, never mind. me in politics, that's a weird thing. Okay, but I use Google Earth to get a sense of the skies and scale and also the landmarks, which I could move around because it's a historical alternate history. And just for the characters' perspective, wherever I had the characters, I always had them oriented on where the monster was at any given time and the vastness of it. I had the characters moving a whole lot too, and the effort that they had to move the distances that the creature moved in an instant helped accentuate the vastness of it.
That's good. That's really cool, actually.
Yeah, so that was one thing too. So I was actually proud of that, but I don't draw attention to that, but that's one of the things in there. Also, what I got into too is the destruction that they had to move through that it caused, because you have something that big, it's just going to destroy everything. There was also, I grew up in California, been through a few earthquakes. I turned that up to 11. Right? Because if you have something like, just the square cube law.
No pun intended.
I mean, these things don't work in real life because of the mass that's coming down every time, but you're basically looking at, 8, 9 earthquakes for everybody in the immediate vicinity every time this thing wiggles.
Yeah. Right?
And so I had just this crazy sequence there. And then to top it off, I had it actually, fighting a naval dirigible. And so that one I went like just whole hog action scene vastness of it, and I did a bunch of little tricks like the distance, the time to accentuate noise, sound, accentuated the sound a lot.
In what way?
Just if you have something that massive as it moves, just the amount of noise it would make. And so I made communication purposefully difficult for the characters that were trying to fight it. Plus I was dealing with a couple characters who were like literally superhuman. So they're able to get up on this thing and fight. And so I had a lot of fun with that. Plus because it was a 1930s thing it was a historical, I was able to like afterwards get little bits for like news coverage, because I was one, remember I had they got this really amazing black and white photo of Heinrich. Right. Fighting the thing he's like stabbing it with a pickaxe and just doesn't do anything. He's just getting flung off into the distance. I had my super Japanese power armor guy challenge it to fight, just get flicked, flicked across the city. So I actually had a lot of fun with that one. The other ones I did, a giant kaiju one, was Great Sea Beast, which was actually
from our role playing game campaign.
So we actually stole this. So we did an L5R campaign where one of the characters, his whole thing was he needed to kill the Great Sea Beast, which was like a basically giant water kaiju that had killed his father. And we had this great role-playing session, and then I needed to hurry up and write a short story with a giant monster in it for an anthology. So I totally stole that scene from a role-playing game. So if you read Great Sea Beast...
It's funny how we've done that.
Which is an award-winning story, by the way, because it was one of those best-of anthologies where it's blind judging, where they get judges and they like pick... They don't tell them who wrote the story, but there's the best stories of the year, and they pick the best stories of the year. Great Sea Beast was one of their picks for the great stories of the year, and the funny thing is the judges all hate me.
Yeah. And
said that I was a terrible, awful writer, no good. And then they picked one of my stories out of the thing as one of the best of the year. So I take great ironic pride in that. That was interesting because that was a watery thing, and so I had to get a little more like boat oriented and how like it's just stuff like it's creating its own currents, as it's moving. And geez, what was the other one? I had another one. I did another kaiju. The giant monster fight in Tokyo Raider.
Yeah.
Because that one I got to go... That one was different because the perspective was all... point of view was from one guy driving a giant Mecha Gundam battle robot, World War II era Mecha Gundam battle robot. I guess that... So, man, there are so many different ways you could do it. Just all comes down to perspective, your point of view characters.
Yeah. The story that I wrote, called A Single Samurai, that one...
That was a really big kaiju.
It's a huge one, right? It's like the size of basically a mountain.
Yeah, I went like big Godzilla King Kong size stuff. Steve went it's a mountain.
Yeah.
Steve went it's a great old one.
Yeah, and the whole perspective to your point, Larry, the whole perspective is from one guy who's climbing it, and on his way he's trying to figure out, okay, how the frick do I kill this thing? And one of the things that I use also is just to show how big it is. Like, he can see forever from on top of it. And when he looks backwards, he just sees just this trail of devastation behind it. Like that country, that part of that country isn't going to recover from this.
You reprinted that in your collection, right?
It is. It's in my What Hellhound's Dream.
Yeah, so if you guys want to read this story, it's in that. It recommended. Very good story.
Yeah, it was supposed to be in an anthology, speaking of, predatory publishers from a few episodes ago. That was supposed to be in a collection from one of those people. And then they forgot to invite me. I'd written it, and I asked them, like, hey, when does this thing due? And they're like, oh, it's full. Sorry.
Then you sold it to Bain, though.
So then I asked Bain, and Bain bought it. So that was awesome. Anyway, I think that was actually my first story published with Bain.
Oh, cool. Good story. Yeah. But if you guys want to read one that's just a good kaiju story for just the sheer immensity, it was actually really good. Because honestly, it was like the guy with, and that one is interesting because you had it where the way I read it, it wasn't really like I was writing like an action scene where they were fighting a monster. Yours, they were fighting a force of nature.
Yeah, and it's much more introspective.
Yeah.
Because the main character, I mean, he's one dude. He's one samurai. How do you fight nature?
Well, it's a journey story too.
Yes.
Because the monster is so big, he has to climb
He's climbing it.
Yeah.
He's climbing the monster to kill it somehow.
So it's a journey story.
Yeah, and so I think the point here is we've done it so very differently.
Yeah.
Again, what we always talk about, Larry, the same topic, but coming at it from wildly divergent aspects.
You know, I actually really like the movie Cloverfield.
Dude, I do too. I love that movie. I really like
Cloverfield. And I'll be honest, because it actually tackled this with a really unique perspective because it just did the heads up. The guy was named HUD.
Yeah.
Heads up display.
Yeah.
Actually, the star of that was Mike Vogel, who's a great guy.
Yeah.
Cool actor.
Well, and
very underrated dude.
That might be my favorite found footage movie.
Oh, yeah. It's a great flick. But that was a really good one because if you look at all the different tricks they do in that one cinematically, because they had like different levels of adventure, and then the monster was just such a great big threat. And a lot of times you didn't even see the monster because it's 6 blocks away, but you could just hear it and see this, chaos.
Well, I mean, that first scene where the head of the Statue of Liberty comes flying down the road, like, dude,
what?
It's awesome. It's great. It's great.
And that was a movie, too. They did a good job not revealing a lot in the advertising before the movie came out. Because I remember when I saw it, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I just remember I heard something was like it's a monster flick, and then I saw it and I was like, wow, okay, this is
Honestly,
pretty baller.
outside of Godzilla, like straight up Godzilla, that's probably the best Godzilla movie out there.
Yeah. So I think there's
And
probably,
I actually like the most recent Godzilla movies.
I watched Godzilla versus Kong and enjoyed it. I had a good time.
They're fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Turn off your brain, have fun.
It was silly and cheesy and stupid and don't think about it too hard. But honestly, I enjoyed it.
But yeah, I mean, and then the one before that where you got to see all of the different Godzilla monsters.
I didn't watch that one.
You didn't?
I haven't
Godzilla
seen that.
King of the Monsters?
Haven't seen it.
Dude, it's pretty awesome seeing
know.
all of those, like
behind
Ghidorah and stuff like that, seeing them all in like modern graphics.
I'm behind in my Godzilla. And I did watch the Godzilla before that had Bryan Cranston in it briefly. That one was that. And it had actually the main hero was an EOD guy, which Mike Coopery found was hilarious because like the guy
was terrible.
Yeah, EOD and did like literally nothing.
He set something on fire. That was his entire contribution.
It's like, just so you guys know, guys, explosive ordnance disposal techs, they spend like millions of dollars training him so the guy could basically hit a monster with a Molotov cocktail.
Yeah, that's literally what happens.
Yeah, I learned how to do that when I was like 10.
I think my biggest problem with that movie, to tie this all back around to monsters and stuff, is they don't show enough of it.
Yeah.
Because it's all in the dark the whole time. You can't see it.
It was
or the other monsters.
A human drama movie with some monsters in it, as opposed to a monster movie.
If I'm watching a giant Godzilla monster movie, I want to see Godzilla.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one time I was talking to Bob Defendi, and he said that was really interesting to me. And he was talking about some space alien invasion movie. And it was just a bunch of people hiding in an apartment during a space alien invasion. And you never actually, they just sit there. They hide in an apartment. Well,
that was Skyline.
Skyline, yeah. And I guess maybe something happens at the very end. I didn't watch it. But at one point, Bob said that he watched a bunch of Marines run by outside. And they're going to go fight the monsters. But you watch the Marines go in the distance and disappear. And Bob said, that's the movie I want to watch.
Well, he could. It was called Battle LA.
Yeah, and I actually liked Battle LA. That was actually a pretty good flick.
All right. We're going to call this one. There's still some more questions. And if you notice, we kind of focused this episode on existing creatures and whatnot. So in the third episode of our trilogy here, so to speak, we're going to focus more on like creating new weird monsters and those kind of questions. So that'll be what our next episode's about. But again, thank you guys so much for tuning in today on the Writer Dojo, and we appreciate all your questions. There are some great questions, of course. A lot of you asked mainly about about monsters and taking them into taking different cultures and their monsters and integrating them and making them feel unique, but still having that similar vibe. So that's kind of what we focused on for this one.
The next one we got something actually kind of cool. That's new and unique.
All new,
creating
unique
from
stuff,
scratch.
And we've both done that as well. So look forward to that episode. But again, thank you guys so much. Thank you everyone for listening to us. We appreciate it. And that's it for us for today. We'll see you on the next one.
Writer Dojo is Steve Diamond and Larry Correia. Produced by Jack Wilder and Bear and Hare Studios. Theme song, Word Mercenaries by Craig Nivo. New episodes come out every Wednesday wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/WriterDojo, by leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on the Writer Dojo, email ads@writerdojo.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to questions@writerdojo.com.
So misunderstood.
So misunderstood. Many of us are so sexy.